What happens when you pit the smartest rocket scientists in the world against, well, 7th grade math? You get a $327 million catastrophe. Yep, today we are unpacking the unbelievable story of how NASA actually lost a Mars orbiter because of a simple conversion error, and why it might have been one of the most important mistakes they ever made.
Okay, let that number sink in for a second. $327.6 million. That's what NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter mission cost. A huge investment, all riding on this one spacecraft to go and unlock the secrets of the red planet's atmosphere.
And just like that, it was gone. It completely vanished, disappeared into the thin Martian air without so much as a whisper. All that money, all those years of work from brilliant people, poof, gone.
Which brings us to the big, almost ridiculous question at the heart of this whole thing. How on earth does this happen? I mean, really, how do some of the brightest minds on the planet lose a state-of-the-art spacecraft because they forgot to check their units? Let's dig in.
The whole story comes to a dramatic and sudden end on September 23, 1999. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, a triumph of engineering. Instead, it became one of NASA's most infamous failures.
So this spacecraft, the Mars Climate Orbiter, or MCO for short, was a huge deal. It wasn't just another probe. Its mission was to become the first ever interplanetary weather satellite. The plan was for it to study the Martian climate and also act as a critical communications relay for its sister mission, the Mars Polar Lander. So, after this long, 9-month cruise all the way from Earth, the MCO finally starts its big orbital insertion burn. At 9:04 in the morning, it goes behind Mars, and the signal cuts out. Now that part was totally expected. What wasn't expected was that the signal disappeared 49 seconds earlier than every single projection said it would. And then, silence. It never came back.
Okay, so what went wrong? What was the culprit behind this massive, expensive disappearing act? Well, the answer is so simple it's almost hard to believe. In fact, it's kind of comical.
Here it is. This is the root of the entire disaster. The engineering team at Lockheed Martin, who built the spacecraft, wrote the ground software to calculate thruster force in pounds. But the navigation team back at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, well, their software was expecting that exact same data in newtons. It was the classic textbook Imperial versus metric mix-up. And the unbelievable part? Nobody caught it.
The entire mission came down to this one number, 4.45. That's the conversion factor you use to get from pounds to newtons. Every single time a thruster fired, the navigation team's math was off by a factor of nearly 4.5. So they thought they were just giving the spacecraft these tiny, gentle nudges to correct its course, when in reality, they were giving it a hard shove every time.
And the result of all those shoves? Well, those tiny little arrows started adding up over 9 months into one giant, fatal deviation. The plan was to skim the atmosphere and enter a nice, safe orbit at 226 kilometers. Instead, the MCO dove way too deep, down to just 57 kilometers. Now, the lowest it could have possibly survived was 80 kilometers. It didn't stand a chance. It either burned up instantly or just skipped off the atmosphere into the void of deep space.
But here's the real twist in the story. That simple math error, it wasn't the real disease. It was just a symptom. The true cause was something much deeper, a systemic failure that was being driven by a whole new management philosophy at NASA.
So let's meet the real villain of this story, a little something called faster, better, cheaper. This was this big NASA initiative in the 90s, right? It was designed to pump out more missions for less money, especially after some earlier projects had gone way over budget. On paper, it sounds great, but in practice, it created an environment where cutting corners, especially on checks and balances, became the new normal.
The official investigation board really laid it all bare. The whole faster, better, cheaper culture led directly to this disaster. The pressure to be cheaper meant the navigation team was seriously understaffed and overworked. Because they were overworked, there was no one around to do an independent peer review. The pressure to be faster meant that critical end-to-end software testing just didn't get done. The entire system of checks and balances that NASA was famous for had been slowly eroded to save a few bucks. And to make everything even worse, there was this one design flaw in the spacecraft itself that just poured gasoline on the fire. The MCO had a single asymmetrical solar array, so think of it like a kite with the tail on only one side. Solar pressure was constantly trying to spin the spacecraft, which forced the thrusters to fire 10 to 14 times more often than anyone expected.
And every single one of those extra firings just compounded that 4.45 conversion error, pushing the orbiter further and further off course with every puff.
Oh, but wait, it gets even worse. People knew something was off. At least 2 navigators actually raised concerns that the spacecraft's path didn't look right. But their warnings were totally dismissed. And why? You're not going to believe this. They were ignored because they didn't fill out the correct form. I'm not kidding. A $327 million mission was lost because of paperwork. It's just unbelievable.
So after this monumental, embarrassing failure, NASA had a choice. They could either try to hide from it, sweep it under the rug, or they could learn from it. And thankfully for all of us, they chose to learn.
A team led by a guy named A. Thomas Young released what became known as the Young Report. It was this scathing review that became a landmark in the aerospace world. It basically concluded that, yeah, faster, better, cheaper is a nice idea, but the way NASA had implemented it was a total disaster. The report famously said that taking on more risk is fine, but it's unacceptable when that risk is just caused by cutting corners on design and review.
And this report became a catalyst for massive, sweeping reforms. NASA completely overhauled its engineering and quality control protocols. They put a renewed focus back on accountability, they totally professionalized their software testing, and they adopted this new mantra, test as you fly, fly as you test, which basically means you rigorously check everything from end to end exactly as it will be in the real mission.
And here's the craziest part, the great irony of this whole story. This catastrophic, deeply embarrassing failure directly paved the way for NASA's golden age of Mars exploration. Seriously. The tough lessons they learned from losing the MCO became the inviolate principles, the unbreakable rules that ensured the stunning successes of the rovers we all know and love, like Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance.
Which leaves us with one last, big, provocative question to think about. This was a failure born from a dumb math error and a flawed management philosophy. But the reforms it forced on NASA led to some of humanity's greatest achievements in space. So, when you look at it that way, was it worth the price? That's something to chew on.